Case 7. Reynold resentful. Reynold's parents just wanted more. More for Reynold. His dad was a cop. His mom stayed at home. They got by just fine, but they weren't, quote, in. That is, they were never in the in crowd. They never felt on top. They were nails, not hammers, in life. Reynold's dad was only a hammer when it came to arresting criminals actively breaking the law, and in his entire career he had maybe 36 events that took him away from filing paperwork, lecturing about bicycle safety at schools, and doing his best to be a therapist for the mentally ill homeless people that City Hall seemed only to care about in bleeding heart press conferences. Well, Dad kept bringing criminals to a holy grail, the courtroom. And that room was dominated by one class of worker. Yeah, lawyers. So in Reynold's home, being a lawyer was the pinnacle of success. His parents more or less demanded that success from Reynold. They believed that a lawyer, in whatever flavor, guaranteed a kind of social panache and power position that would carry their son to great heights in his life and career. And well, more or less, it did. Reynold was one of the senior partners at Hanks Muncini, a dominant Silicon Valley law firm with some 5,000 lawyers. With salary and bonus, Reynold, now in his late 50s, made a bit more than $2 million a year. And this was awesome from the reflection of his parents' dreams. He had become the highly respected insider social power player that they had always dreamed he would be. Awesome. Except that it wasn't. Not for Reynold, anyway. He carried the misfortune of having a high degree of self-awareness. Something like that. Well, it took him 25 years of politicking endlessly, kissing corporate tail for clients and accounts, and working 60-hour weeks to finally save enough money to be able to afford a reasonably nice home in Palo Alto, California. That's sort of the heart of Silicon Valley. Well, he didn't have many other assets beyond a relatively small retirement pension account at Hanks Muncini. Why? Why was this such a problem? Well, Silicon Valley is dominated by tech entrepreneurs and the early option-owning employees who helped create those big companies. Yeah, that's who dominates it. So homes sell for well over $2,000 a square foot in the good areas. An 8,000 square foot home on a quarter acre in Palo Alto sells for somewhere between $15 and $20 million. So in this stellar year where Reynold earned $2 million, well, after tax, he took home less than half that amount. With federal, state, and other taxes in California, hardworking professionals lose about half of their income to taxes. So Reynold took home $1 million last year. But then he had 3 kids in private school, $80,000 each, plus other costs. You know how private schools hit you up for donations. None of those were deductible, except the donations. He had orthodontia bills not covered by insurance for his youngest. His wife loved to travel, another $50,000 out the door, and on and on and on and on. But at the end of the year, he'd saved over $250,000. Pretty good, huh? Well, at that rate, he could pay for a $15 million home in Palo Alto in, 60 years. Well, he had seen what a lawless city like San Francisco looked like through his dad's experience on the front lines. So it was important to him to keep his family in the safe bubble of Palo Alto, which was no less liberal but merely more sheltered from the epidemic of homelessness, crime, and bad politics that plagued San Francisco. He wished he could move his family to a different state, but, he was trapped professionally. He hated California, but he was handcuffed to Silicon Valley. His clients had mostly fled the state, uprooted and moved to Wyoming, Texas, Florida, even Puerto Rico, enjoying lower taxes, more stable governments, and freedom. Freedom he wishes he had more of in oh so many ways. Well, he realized far too late in his life and career that lawyers were just, ideological bricklayers hauling ideas from one end of the clay quarry on paper to the other. They were paid, hourly for the most part, and their pay was only a fraction of the pay of a well-established investment banker, which was only a fraction of the pay of an early startup option-owning employee in a hot tech startup, which was only a fraction of the pay of an early option-holding startup employee in a company who did well, which was only a fraction of the pay of a successful founder in a company who did well. And yeah, a lot of companies don't. But Reynold knew that the crumbs of kings were usually a much better living than the frosting of feudal serfs. So he courted kings and ended up running Hanks Muncini's venture capital practice, where he made it his business to court the love of venture capitalists and their founders so that Hanks Muncini would harvest an income stream for legal fees of these well-heeled companies and people for decades to come. As such, Reynold had befriended Don Window along the way, had aligned with him politically, and helped commit Hanks Muncini resources to charities that Window cared about. Their gentle payback was that Don referred clients to Reynold when it made sense, and it made sense often. Reynold did not yet even realize it, but he would soon be chosen to put together the legal work, the more sophisticated details beyond the $99 LegalZoom incorporation that Tiff and Norman had downloaded as they formed the Common Parts Robotics Corporation. And it was Reynold who would represent CPR's funding rounds, despite the angst he ingested filling out the lottery ticket for others to potentially win big, yet again, as he was left on the sidelines. So Reynold remained stuck in his life, having to play servant inside of a kind of technocracy-driven social caste system, where, despite his parents' wishes of making him a hitter, a baller, a leader of men, well, he had become just the opposite. He was desperate to get out, but exiting the safe, salaried environment of Hanks Muncini never let him take the plunge into being an entrepreneur. And as he got married and had kids, the friction grew worse. Despite offers from many clients to join as general counsel early in the company's history, he could never bring himself to unlock the law firm's golden handcuffs, a conservatism he grew to resent, even hate. So, in order to survive emotionally, he placed small amounts of speculative capital, 25 grand here, 15 grand there, into his clients' early funding rounds. He thought of them as expensive lottery tickets that maybe someday he would win. And thus far, all of those lottery tickets had gone bust. Well, Reynold used to be a surfer. The waves of the world called out to him, but he'd always just had to ignore them, hoping that, well, maybe one day the lottery would call his name, and not in a Shirley Jackson way. He was more or less a provider of a commodity service that clients could get from a host of purveyors, as he would eventually fade into the sunset feeling failure in having so poorly completed the value system of success upon which he had been reared.